Good morning, and I'll thank you for joining us at the Meaford Church of Christ. This is going to be a little bit different than usual. Just for a moment, I want to show that we have set up the upstairs for meeting here. Now, we're not going to start meeting yet, but I wanted to give people a few weeks of prep time, and I want you to especially notice this green piece of tape. I don't know why I almost called it orange. Okay, so see this green tape right here? This tape is indicating that this is where you should sit. And so what we've done is all the places that are good to sit in, that are socially distanced from everyone else, is going to have a piece of green tape on it like this. We have tried to block off the places where you shouldn't be sitting with a bit of construction tape. I'm sure interior designers are losing their minds right now. But you can see that the building is laid out, or the auditorium is laid out in such a way, all right, that you can come in and take a seat. Now, one important point is that the way we exit in order to maintain social distancing is going to have to be a little more controlled than it is downstairs. So if you're sitting here, right, we're in the back pew near the back of the room, you have to leave first. We have to exit as if it's a funeral or a wedding. We're all kind of used to doing that, but that way we're not passing one another because there's not enough distance here in the aisle to maintain social distancing while we're leaving. We are going to be coming and going out of this one same door, which requires a little bit of extra work. Now, obviously, there will be some people who are coming through that door because they need the elevator. So just wanted to give you a quick look at this. We're not going to start meeting here immediately. It'll probably be sometime near the end of October. For sure, though, it'll be after Thanksgiving. All right, so just wanted to give everyone a look at that and explain how this works. So the way it works, once again, just to conclude, you're going to come in back here. You're going to walk as far to the front as you possibly can, and then find the first empty space that has green tape on it, and that's where, there we go, that has green tape on it like this, and that's where you'll need to sit. All right, there are a couple spaces at the very front that are opened, and that's fine if you sit there. What we'll probably do eventually, once we have others participating in service, you'll notice there's a spot right up there. Someone could sit there, walk to this podium, and I can move and sit over there, and we can maintain social distancing that way. So we may have someone else participate in the Lord's table. We still won't be singing. That'll be the same. All right. But I wanted to put this announcement out there for two reasons. One, so that people could watch this video and get familiar with the process. Two, so that people could see it. And if you're comfortable participating with worship, then the expectation will be that you sit right there so you can walk to this podium. You know, if you're going to do the Lord's table, then you can do the Lord's table, then go back and sit there, and you don't have to pass anybody. We can maintain social distancing. All right, so I'm going to stop and flip this camera around, or put it back on the tripod so that we can get into our usual Sunday morning stuff. Welcome once again. Thank you for joining us for a time of worship and devotion here with the Meaford Church of Christ. I do have a couple of announcements to get to. You'll obviously know the first one is that we're planning to transition to worshiping in this upstairs room, and that's not going to be right away. We'll make sure that we announce when that's going to happen. It'll likely be sometime soon after Thanksgiving. And we'll give lots of instructions so there won't be any confusion. I know if you looked at the video, the room may seem a little bit confusing with the caution tape and stuff, but rest assured, on the first day you show up, it'll be very simple, and we'll have people, myself probably, here to kind of direct everyone where to go and how to be seated and that kind of thing, okay? So that's the first announcement. We'll let you know when that's happening. For now, we're still going to be worshiping downstairs the way we have been. The other announcement is that starting October 14th, at 2 p.m., we're going to have our midweek devotional here at the building, again, down in the lower fellowship hall. We'll be socially distanced. We will be wearing masks and being aware of how we enter and exit the building. All right, we'll have to follow all the same protocols we do on Sunday morning for worship. Also, we won't be doing any singing, which is a bit of a loss compared to our midweek devotionals that we've been having outdoors, but that's just part of the deal right now. So, we'll do as much as we can. It will be a more formal Bible study, and so if you enjoy that, if you want to learn about the Bible, if you want to grow in your knowledge and faith, please join us. Now, in addition, we will still continue, for those of you who would be concerned about that, to send out the midweek video studies with the questions. That will continue as it has been, and that will continue for, who knows how long, as long as we don't really have any other good options. And of course, if you're watching this, if you're part of the church here or not, and you're looking for good video material to use at home for Bible study, don't hesitate to get in touch with me. There is so much material out there, not just what we generate here at the church. And so I'm happy to share, all kinds of resources, everything that I know of with you if you need that. All right, I'd like to transition now. So if you're watching and are conducting your own home worship service, go ahead, pause, take a moment to prepare for the Lord's table, whether you're going to have a song or prayer, and then come back and join us as we share some thoughts pertaining to the sacrifice of our Lord. So we can read in Matthew 26 and other places about how Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper and asked us as his disciples to continue this memorial in remembrance of him. And we do that, as the example and teaching of the New Testament indicates, every Sunday, every first day of the week. And that's as it should be. However, I want you to think with me for a moment about why do we do it every week? Right? Is it because, from Sunday to Sunday, you're going to forget that Jesus made a sacrifice to redeem you from sin? Is it because, you're so distracted by the world that you can't even keep it in your mind for 1 week? Well, no, I don't think that's the case at all. The reason we partake of it on such a frequent basis, and the reason we have the teaching and example of Scripture instructing us to do that, is because from Monday to Saturday, the expectation is that we will live in the light of, we will live embracing the implications of that sacrifice. And that does take weekly mindfulness. That does take an ongoing, continuous thought process about what Jesus has done for us and why that's so important to our lives. And so I want to talk this morning just a little bit. Of course, we're going to partake of the emblems in a minute, but, well, you will be at home, but what we won't be doing on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday is partaking of those same emblems. So are there ways that we can embrace that memorial to live out the Lord's table daily the way that we're supposed to be reminded to do by that weekly memorial? And I think, yes, there are many ways. The most important way is to live and act as sacrifices. To live as those who are not our own but have been bought with a price, to glorify God in our bodies, to present our bodies a living sacrifice following the example of Jesus. Now that's very generic, okay? That's not very specific, but some of the ways we can put that into practice specifically is to live in a way that's loving and forgiving. Right? It's Jesus' love and forgiveness that's on display in the crucifixion, and his love and forgiveness ought to be on display in our lives. Right? To spend time each day and on a regular basis in prayer, to teach your children the importance of Jesus and what he's done and what it means for the world and for them and how they ought to respond. To keep up with your brothers and sisters. It's a show of communion, right? We call it communion on purpose, to show our unity and solidarity. And that unity and solidarity needs to continue through the week. So keep up with your brethren, understand what's going on in their lives, take an interest in them and their activities. And so all of those are ways that we can embody the memorial that we partake of on Sunday, that we can make it have a lasting impact through the rest of the week, other than just, we take a few minutes to think about Jesus on Sunday. That's not the point. The point is that we live our whole lives for Jesus. And so I hope that encourages you and informs you and helps you as we take a few moments to partake of these emblems together. So last week, we began a discussion that, is a difficult discussion to have in a time like ours, where there's so many and so heated opinions on gender and sexuality and what it means to be a good man and what it means to be a good woman. And my main point last week is that the world is really, really confused about this. And often the things that the world is going to tell us and the things that the world is going to tell our children and grandchildren are extremely damaging, right? Are not helpful at all. And we end up with boys and girls confused and angry and not understanding why, look, I took the advice that I was given about how to be a good man or how to be a good woman, and I didn't get the results that were promised. And that's because the advice the world is giving on these subjects is horrible advice and can only result in disaster. And so last week and this week, I would like to examine the idea of being good, godly men and good, godly women from a biblical perspective as a counterpoint to the constant bombardment that the world gives us and our children, trying to get us to believe their nonsense. And so, like last week I had be a man, because that's the phrase that you may hear if you're a boy and you're behaving in a way that doesn't seem masculine enough to someone. Be a man, okay? Well, ladies are less likely to hear that, although I've heard someone say to a woman to be more, act more like a man, act more masculine, act a little tougher. And I think Paul's instructions in 1 Corinthians 16 were directed to everyone when it came to the toughness and durability that it took to remain faithful, right? He was taking a masculine characteristic and saying, hey, it's good to be applied to everyone. All right, now here we want to talk specifically about women. And women probably won't be told to be a man, but they'll be told, that's not very ladylike. That's not very ladylike. All right. And frankly, I don't know how useful that phrase actually is. All right. Most of the examples that I've seen in my life have been less than helpful and in fact probably harmful. However, that is sort of the cliche phrase that gets thrown around when we talk about this particular subject matter. And so this morning, I'd like to talk about how to be a good and godly woman from a biblical perspective and reflect a little bit on what advice we receive from the world that we ought to be aware of. Okay, so those are the two things we're going to try to address. Well, the one thing is how to be a godly woman. We'll address some bad advice. You could say how not to be a godly woman as well in this particular lesson. To start out, we have to acknowledge the same thing we acknowledged last week about men, and that is there are some characteristics that are going to be typical of women, and that's fine. Just like there were characteristics that were typical of men, there will be things that are pretty common about women. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 27 says, God created us male and female. The implication of that is that it's part of human nature. It's part of who and what we are as humanity to express ourselves or to find these two different genders expressed. All right? There are two different distinct genders that make up the human race, and that's the first thing we have to acknowledge. Women, when tested, show greater propensity for enthusiasm, for compassion, for politeness, for orderliness, for openness, and you can take this whether good or bad, you can interpret it for yourself, for volatility. That means, emotional changes tend to be greater in women than men. They tend to be more agreeable than men. Now, I mean this, again, in an academic sense rather than in a common sense, okay? And so agreeableness, when it's used in an academic or sociological setting, means they're more conscientious and open-minded and often somewhat conflict averse. Okay, that means they're going to avoid getting in fights to some degree, at least physical fights. Okay, women are, of course, physically smaller than men. They have lower bone density and higher body fat. It should be pointed out, we didn't mention this last week, but one of the major physiological differences between men and women is in our brains. So male and female brains are very different, even to the point that the sizes of different brain structures are different and they're used differently. So, a frontal cortex response in a man, when you're looking at it in a brain scan, will look different than the same part of the brain responding in a woman. Same with other parts of the brain. So very significant differences in the physiological functioning of our brains. And I think that says a lot. Women will be more interested in people and relationships than men. Remember last week we said men are more interested in things. Okay? In fact, it's been noticed that even infants, all right, young girls will begin to pay attention to and read the faces of the people around them, where young boys don't pay much attention to that. All right? And so girls become very good at reading emotion and understanding expression, where boys definitely take a little longer to figure that out. All right, and that does, we see that manifest often when we talk about girls being more emotionally and socially mature than boys at various stages in their development. Right? By the way, this also, we talked about this last week, we'll talk about it again, has a pretty distinct impact on career choice. Men are more interested in careers that are about interacting with people and helping people and supporting people, where men and boys tend not to be quite as interested in some of those things. And again, we're talking about, the majority of the population. Will there be individual boys and individual girls who don't fit into these categories? Of course there will, and that's to be expected and understood. That's not the point of this, to say you must be this way if you're a girl, you must be this way if you're a boy. Okay? And of course, this is just to point out that there are general differences in the sexes. Of course, the biggest difference, in addition to all the other physical differences that we have talked about, is that women can do something powerful and almost miraculous. And that is, women can conceive and bear children. Powerful. And Paul, in a rather, it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek way that he does this, okay? He's talking about, the head of Christ is God and Christ is the head of man and man is the head of woman. But he points out, to think that men, may get too big for their britches, or think, see, Paul said I'm in charge here. So he says, men, you need to realize that every single one of you exists only because of a woman, right? And so Paul acknowledges the unique position that women have in society because of their unique capacity to bear children. Now, I want to, as we're thinking about these differences and pointing them out, I have to say that one of the greatest disservices that society right now especially does to women is to tell women that they have to think and act and be like men. Right? That is not fair and it's not right. And just like we said this about the boys last week, we'll say it about the girls this week. To put two very different genders and throw them in the same pot and expect the same results and the same performance in the same conditions is not fair. And it's not helpful to boys or girls. All right, and so when we do that in schools, or we do it in the workforce, or we do it in social settings, it's not appropriate and it's not helpful. Right? And one of the worst ways that I see this expressed is women attacking other women, of course on Twitter, because Twitter is where all the worst things on the internet happen. I don't have Twitter because every single time, please do this experiment for me. Every time you see something horrible happen online, where you see examples of online bullying and mobs of people attacking someone for a completely benign reasons and just being horrible, you'll find that those stories always happen on Twitter. It is the worst thing that's ever existed for humanity, and so I don't have Twitter. And I would recommend anyone watching this delete their Twitter account, because it's garbage, it's a cesspool. Now, one of the things you see regularly on Twitter is women being attacked and ridiculed by other women for posting pictures of their children. Right? For posting pictures of them feeling like they're being successful and effective as mothers, and they're told they should be ashamed of that and they're betraying their gender if they elevate the role of motherhood. And I think that's a shame. And I would think,
Anyway, when it comes to women, and their causes in the world, you would think they would know enough to support one another. Okay? But I guess it's a problem for all of humanity that, we like to make ourselves feel big by making someone else feel small. And that's sad, especially when one woman does it to another. And that'll come up again, actually, in our lesson. Of course, what we should do is support women for the choices they make, especially the choice to be a good mother. It's something that only a woman can do. And if you're a woman watching this and you have chosen to be a mother and devote your life, like my mother did, to the success and well-being of your children, you are doing the best thing that you can do in this world. Don't let anyone tell you that because you're not a CEO or a manager or pursuing some other, outside of the family career, that you're betraying anything. Right? You are doing exactly what you should be doing. Remember, and I'm not saying, by the way, that any of those things are bad. They're not. But I will say this. Remember the story of Mary and Martha. Right? Mary and Martha, they both made choices. Neither one of them were inherently evil choices. But Jesus did point out that Mary's choice was best. Now, we've acknowledged that women are different. They're unique. And that uniqueness, those feminine characteristics, ought to be embraced. And no one should ever make a woman feel bad or less than because of those feminine characteristics. That includes men, certainly, and it includes other women as well. And so when we think about those feminine characteristics, just like with men, we pointed out that there are some problems that men have, all right? That there are some problems that are more likely to manifest in men than women. Well, the same thing is true in women. Women are more likely to experience depression. They're more likely to experience anxiety. They're more likely to experience the various challenges of life that are associated with depression and anxiety. Okay, that's part of the deal. All right. Now, that doesn't mean that women's characteristics are not good and helpful and deeply contributive to society. And so, what are the characteristics that women have that can be used for good, and what are the ways that they can possibly go wrong? First, women are highly conscientious. Right? This is a natural Christian trait. That means, women are likely to find themselves in a great position when it comes to reading Scripture. They'll identify with many of the passages there. Think about Galatians chapter 5:22, the fruit of the Spirit, or 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 through 7, the virtues that Christians should develop. And when you read, let's just read the virtues: faith, virtue, knowledge, self-control, steadfastness, godliness, brotherly love, and love. Many of these characteristics are going to come more natural to women, and that is a great blessing, because they're highly conscientious. Now, there is the problem that sometimes that good nature can be taken advantage of. And I heard one person, I believe it was Jordan Peterson, but I could be wrong, and maybe I've just heard it from a couple of sources, but sometimes because women are so conscientious, they can be taken advantage of. Right? They want to do a good job. They want to be liked and appreciated. And sometimes they'll bend over backwards for a boss or for a friend or for a neighbor because of that desire, because of that conscientiousness, and in that way be taken advantage of, either in the workplace or in other settings. And Matthew 10:16 warns us to be as wise as serpents, but as innocent as doves. And so retain that innocence, retain that goodness, but don't allow yourself to be manipulated because of it. Especially in the workplace, this can mean that women don't get the credit they deserve for the hard work that they do. And so that's number one. Another aspect of conscientiousness that can be a challenge is comparing ourselves to others. Now, all people are guilty of this to some degree or another, but women can really be thrown off. And this is a huge problem for young girls right now. Social media, I would suggest, is really potentially damaging for young girls. And if you're watching this and you're a mother who has a daughter that's like between the ages of 10 and 20, you need to be so careful, right? The damage that is being done to young girls right now as a direct result of social media is extremely dangerous. And I'm not saying they should never use social media, but they need to know that most of social media is a lie. Those girls don't really look like that. Their whole life is not really a vacation. They don't have unlimited amounts of money the way that they make it look on Facebook or Instagram. And trying to keep up with those images that are fake images is not healthy. Number one. But number two, this is perhaps one of the saddest things about this. We're going to bring this up again in a second. But often those platforms are used for bullying. All right, and we're going to, let's move on to the next point. And that is, women are naturally more compassionate and more aware of emotional needs. They are able to understand how people are feeling, and they're able to understand how to navigate those emotions. Right? Men, granted, are not quite as good at this. And here's the thing. Sometimes women will use that superpower, if you will. Okay, and often to men it really seems like a superpower. How do you know what that person's feeling? And the woman's going, couldn't you see? It was plain as day. And the men are like, no, I couldn't. I don't understand. Okay, now again, this is not all men, but this is a pretty common experience. Now, sometimes, sadly, women use that emotional sense, that ability to know what's going on in people's hearts and minds to hurt them. And, men, there's no doubt, men are a little more competitive, they're a little more aggressive, for sure. Normally, though, that will express itself, or normally that is tempered by the fact that if two men start kind of, competing and really going head to head, they've got to dial it back a certain amount because someone's going to get punched in the nose. Okay? Women, because they don't generally carry out physical acts of aggression, they don't have to dial it back. They can just keep upping the ante until someone is emotionally crushed. And I have to tell you that I have had women come to talk to me about things and describe treatment carried out toward them by other women that is deplorable. And that is really sad. And it ties into, and especially now, as young girls are on social media, younger girls are using social media to carry out these emotional bullying attacks, and it's so sad. And so women need to be aware of the fact that they have this power to read and interpret emotions and not to use it for negative things, okay? And so older women, moms, older sisters, aunts and uncles, aunts, grandparents, right? Teach the younger women that they can use their ability to perceive emotions for so many good and helpful and important things, and not to use them to harm others. Because it's just so sad that we can take something that is a blessing from God and use it so negatively. 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says we should build one another up, right? Not tear one another down. And of course, Titus chapter 2, verses 3 through 5 says that older women ought to teach the younger women, right? How to be godly, how to be good mothers, how to love and teach their children, to be self-controlled, pure, and work at home, right? And so let's not let those good natural tendencies that women have ever be used for negative purposes. And then finally, just like we said last week with men, the thing that we need to do now more than ever, given the context in which we're living, in the context in which we're raising children, we need to make sure that we are correcting the misconceptions and the lies that are being told to our kids at school and through the media and through the magazines they read and through the social media they consume, right? Those sources are giving them so many bad ideas. And as parents, and the older generation, okay, we need to be teaching. So Titus, again, chapter 2 says, older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good. And so train young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, submissive to their husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. Now this particular class is not so much about marriage, so we won't get into too much about the husband and wife dynamic, but we should get into the fact that older women are to teach younger women what is good, okay? And to help them to avoid the lies that they're being told from so many sources. By the way, you need to do this because boys will also take advantage of women's good nature. All right? And so there are a lot of risks out there that women need to be warned about, that young women need to be warned about, and older women as well. Now, if you look online, if you look in magazines, newspapers, various places, you can find lists of, the expectations or the characteristics that women should develop and embrace. Okay, and I've included a lot of these here, and this is, again, what the world is telling women. Now, last week we did this. Last week we shared what the world says men ought to be like. All right, we said some of those things were good. I mean, change a tire was on the list. Well, that's good for anybody to know. All right, the whole list may not be perfect, and that's not the point, right? The point is, these things are kind of touted as gender-specific pieces of knowledge, which I don't really think is fair. And so women are told they should know how to remove unwanted body hair. They should know how to dump someone, how to set a lovely table, how to dress for her body type, how to hide a bad hair day, how to write a cover letter, how to help someone in need, how to pick the right bra, how to find the best deal, how to open a bottle of champagne, to perform the Heimlich maneuver and CPR, how to cook a turkey, how to negotiate a raise, and there are others we could go on and on, okay? Now, my point is, these are characteristics that we're told by the world are womanly characteristics, and I kind of look at that and go, really? Right? A man can't have a bad hair day. I know I keep my hair short enough that I can't really do it, but I know in other times I wear a hat. Okay. And so again, there are things that women can and should embrace, but they're often not the things that the world tells them they should embrace. And I've got to touch on something really, really troubling right now, because it betrays a larger problem. Recently, there was a song released by an artist named Cardi B, and the song describes graphic sexuality and women doing all kinds of things and talking about sexuality in horrendously inappropriate ways. Okay, now, is it a surprise that in pop and rock music, sexuality makes up some of the content? No, that's not surprising at all. That's been the way it has been forever. Okay, but what's surprising is the response. Some of the ways that influencers, people who claim to know something about this, will have called this song an anthem of female empowerment. All right, and called Cardi B an example for women to look up to. And that's what's sad and horrendous about this. Right? Women are being told that the one thing that they have to offer, the one thing that makes them worthwhile, is their sexuality. And I can't tell you, but as I was reading some of the responses to this song and some of the things that were said about female sexuality, I'm like, is there some sex-addicted guy secretly writing all this? Right? And of course, no, that's not. It's other women, and I'm going, what is happening? Who thinks this is good advice? Right? Women being told that the only advantage they have in life is their sexuality, and embracing that and using it to gain every advantage you can is the only way that a woman can get ahead. What kind of a message is that? 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 9, on the other hand, says, likewise also women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly attire. Now, I want you to notice a couple things. One, this passage always gets brought up when the subject of modesty gets thrown around. And look, the passage says nothing about how much skin is showing, because that's not the point. Right? The point of modesty is not about how much skin you're showing off. You could be fully covered and be behaving and dressing in an incredibly immodest way, or you could be largely uncovered and be behaving very modestly. Right? The point of modesty is this: it's trying to use your outward appearance to get attention, to validate yourself and feel good about yourself because of how you look, and to get other people's positive attention because of that. Right? And I would argue that whatever you're wearing, if the purpose is, I'm going to get the attention of the opposite sex, or I'm going to show other women how great I am because I can look hot, right? It sounds even weird to say, guys. That's immodest. All right? Rather, what ought to attract people to you is your good character. Right? And this is true, by the way, of men or women. How many displays do you see by men who are trying to show off how great they are and how rich they are and how smart they are by the clothes they wear or the car they drive? Like that's all immodest behavior. And it's not appropriate. What ought to draw people to you, what you ought to be seeking to show the world around you, is your Christian character and the grace of God. Right? If you think about this, and I want you to think about the longevity of that. Right? How long can you look good? How long can you attain positive attention simply by how you look on the outside? Right? I've gone to a museum before, and there are a lot of beautiful pictures there, and you look at each picture and you move on with life. Right? But when you read a book, right, you read it for hours, and some books you read over and over again because they're so interesting and so helpful and so entertaining. Right? And that little analogy is just meant to demonstrate that it's what's inside that matters. And it's upon those internal characteristics that you need to build your self-worth and certainly build a relationship with others. Because outward appearance won't build relationships. I have to say that I have been incredibly blessed by the strong, godly women who have been a part of my life. And I can't say enough about the impact that my mother and my grandmother and my mother-in-law and my wife and many others, aunts and close family friends have had on me. And yes, I do take personal offense and even become a little bit angry at a society who would tell them that they are less because they chose family and relationships. To tell them that they were wrong to develop and embrace their feminine characteristics. These women are every bit as significant and more life-shaping than many of the male role models I had. And I've had many great male role models. But I am so glad that I had women in my life who took the role of mother seriously, who demonstrated godly compassion to me and others around me. And look, here's the key. And this is perhaps the most damaging thing. Children in development need both. It's proven over and over and over again in study upon study upon study that children need a mother and a father. And without one, they don't do as well. And so if you want the best for your children, be there for them. Teach them, be a role model, spend time with them. That is far, far better than anything you could give them by getting money and paying for stuff. The Bible has a lot to say about men and women. We could go on with this series for a long, long time. But the point is that both men and women need to be faithful to God's standard, to His word. And that's the only way that we can stand up against the constant onslaught of misinformation that is fed to us and to everyone around us in terms of, gender. And it reminds us that God created us male and female for a reason, and we need both. And so let's embrace God's standards of womanhood. Teach them to our daughters, but not just our daughters, to our sons as well, so that they know how to pick good, godly wives. And so that all of us can be our best in our ongoing interactions with one another. Right? Remember, we're in this world together, and men have to know how to interact with women in a way that's appropriate and helpful, and women have to know how to interact with men in a way that's appropriate and helpful. Remember, the Apostle Paul told Timothy to remember not the example of his father, who was, by all accounts, a non-believer. Okay? Likely an unbeliever. But to remember the teaching of his mother and grandmother. Remember, it was Priscilla and Aquila who taught Apollos more correctly. That is, a husband and wife together. It was Mary who first saw and shared the resurrection. But women can't play these kinds of critical roles if they accept the world's teaching about who they are and who they're supposed to be instead of God's. And so the world does need to think differently about women. But the answers don't lie in third wave or whatever wave feminism we're on these days. The answers lie in the Word of God, who created us, male and female, and who understands us better than anyone else can or ever will.